My name is Mia Troutman. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how my sister told me I'd never succeed. So I took a risk that changed everything. 5 years ago, I was sitting at my parents' dinner table when my older sister Sarah looked me dead in the eye and said something that shattered me completely. She said, "Mia, you're a failure, and you always will be." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach, and in that moment, everything around me went silent. I felt my face burn with shame as everyone at the table just stared at their plates, not defending me, not saying a word. That was the moment I realized I had to prove her wrong, no matter what it took. If you've ever been called a failure by someone you love, hit that like button right now and subscribe, because what happens next might just inspire you to prove your doubters wrong too. I'll never forget the look on Sarah's face when she said it. There was this cold satisfaction in her eyes, like she'd been waiting years to finally say what she really thought about me. My hands started shaking under the table, and I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in front of her. The silence that followed was deafening, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears like a drum. My mom cleared her throat uncomfortably and changed the subject, pretending like nothing had happened, which somehow made it worse. In that single moment, something inside me broke, but something else awakened, a fierce determination I didn't even know I had. What Sarah didn't know was that her cruel words would become the fuel for the biggest transformation of my life. I excused myself from the table, went to my old childhood bedroom, and sat there in the dark for hours, replaying every single moment of my life where I'd felt less than her. She was always the golden child, the one with the perfect job, the perfect boyfriend, the perfect everything, while I struggled to find my path. But that night, instead of falling apart completely, I made myself a promise that would change everything. I decided right then and there that I would take the biggest risk of my life, even if it terrified me, even if I failed, because living with her words echoing in my head forever would be worse than any failure. Before I tell you about the risk that changed my life, you need to understand how I got to that breaking point at the dinner table. Growing up, Sarah was 3 years older than me, and from the time I was little, she was always the star of the family. She got straight A's, I got B's and C's. She was captain of the volleyball team. I barely made junior varsity. She went to a prestigious university on a full scholarship, while I went to community college because that's all we could afford after my parents spent so much on her education. Every single achievement in my life was overshadowed by something bigger and better that Sarah had already done. I know some of you watching have felt invisible in your own family, so drop a like if this resonates with you, and make sure you're subscribed because you need to hear how this story ends. The worst part wasn't even the comparisons. It was how Sarah seemed to enjoy reminding me of them. At every family gathering, she'd find subtle ways to mention her promotions, her salary, her amazing apartment in the city, while I was still living with a roommate in a tiny studio. She'd ask me about my job with this fake concern in her voice, but I could see the judgment in her eyes when I talked about working as a barista while trying to figure out what I really wanted to do. Our parents never said anything directly, but I could feel their disappointment radiating off them every time Sarah's accomplishments came up in conversation. I started avoiding family dinners, making excuses, because being around them made me feel like I was drowning in my own inadequacy. The label of the unsuccessful one had been stamped on my forehead, and I didn't know how to remove it. But here's what nobody knew. Not Sarah, not my parents, not anyone. I had dreams that were bigger than anything they could imagine. Deep down, I wanted to start my own business, create something meaningful, build something from nothing that was entirely mine. The problem was, every time I thought about actually doing it, I'd hear Sarah's voice in my head telling me I wasn't smart enough, wasn't capable enough, wasn't enough, period. So I stayed small, stayed safe, stayed stuck in a life that felt like it was slowly suffocating me, until that dinner, until those words, until that moment when she finally said out loud what I'd been afraid everyone was thinking all along. That's when everything changed, because sometimes you need to hit rock bottom before you can push yourself back up. Let me paint you a picture of what it was really like growing up in Sarah's shadow, because understanding this relationship is crucial to understanding why her words cut so deep. From the time I was 5 years old, Sarah made it her mission to remind me that I was second best at everything. When I learned to ride a bike, she told me I was doing it wrong and showed me how she could ride with no hands. When I brought home a drawing from school that I was proud of, she'd point out all the things I could have done better. It wasn't just sibling rivalry. It was a constant, systematic breaking down of my confidence that went on for over 2 decades. If you grew up with a sibling who made you feel small, smash that like button and subscribe, because I'm about to show you how I turned that pain into power. The older we got, the more sophisticated her put-downs became. In high school, when I was excited about getting asked to prom, Sarah made comments about how the guy probably only asked me because he couldn't get a date with anyone prettier. When I got my first job at a local coffee shop, she asked me when I was going to get a real job, like hers at a law firm. Every single milestone in my life was diminished, minimized, and used as an opportunity for her to showcase her own superiority. My parents, God love them, were completely oblivious to the psychological warfare happening right under their noses. They saw Sarah as the protective older sister, and me as the sensitive younger one who took things too personally. But here's the thing about being constantly criticized and belittled. It becomes the voice in your own head. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I didn't even need Sarah to tear me down anymore because I was doing it to myself. I'd look at job postings for positions I was qualified for and think, why bother? You'll never be as good as Sarah anyway. I'd have ideas for creative projects and immediately dismiss them as stupid or unrealistic. Sarah had successfully programmed me to believe that mediocrity was my destiny, and the worst part was that I had accepted it as truth. Until that dinner, until she said those words out loud, I didn't realize how much power I had given her over my life. Now let me take you back to that exact moment at the dinner table, because this is where everything shifted. It was a Sunday evening in March, and my parents had invited both of us over for their anniversary celebration. Sarah had just finished telling everyone about her latest promotion to senior associate, and the whole table was fawning over her success, asking questions, congratulating her, making toasts in her honor. Then my mom, trying to be fair, I guess, turned to me and asked, "So Mia, how are things going with you?" in that tone that already expected disappointment. I started to answer, mentioning that I was thinking about maybe starting a small online business selling handmade jewelry, something I'd been passionate about for years but never had the courage to pursue seriously. Before I could even finish my sentence, Sarah let out this condescending laugh that made my stomach drop. She put down her wine glass, looked directly at me with this cold smile, and said, "Mia, let's be real here. You're a failure, and you always will be. You can't even hold down a regular job, and now you think you're going to run a business? That's honestly embarrassing." The room went completely silent, and I felt like I'd been slapped across the face in front of everyone I loved. What happened next is burned into my memory forever. I looked at my dad, expecting him to defend me, but he just looked down at his plate. My mom made this uncomfortable sound and said something like, "Sarah, that's a bit harsh," but it was weak, unconvincing, like she didn't really disagree. Sarah just shrugged and said, "Someone needs to tell her the truth instead of letting her waste more years on pipe dreams." In that moment, sitting at that table with my family's silence confirming what Sarah had just said, I felt something crack open inside my chest. It was like years of accumulated pain, rejection, and self-doubt all came flooding out at once. But underneath all that pain, there was something else. Something fierce and burning that I'd never felt before. It was rage, yes, but it was also determination, clarity, and a sudden understanding that I had a choice. I could either let her words define me forever, or I could use them as the spark that ignited the biggest transformation of my life. I drove home from that dinner in complete shock, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The 20-minute drive felt like hours, and I couldn't stop replaying Sarah's words over and over in my head like a broken record. "You're a failure, and you always will be." Each time I heard it, it felt like a fresh wound opening up in my chest. I pulled into my apartment parking lot and just sat there in my car for 45 minutes staring at nothing, feeling absolutely paralyzed. If you've ever had someone's words cut so deep you couldn't move, hit that subscribe button and drop a like, because I'm about to share how I turned this rock-bottom moment into my biggest breakthrough. When I finally made it inside my tiny studio apartment, I looked around and saw my life through Sarah's eyes for the first time. The secondhand furniture, the stack of bills on the counter, the sketchbook full of jewelry designs I'd never had the courage to actually make and sell. Was she right? Was I really just fooling myself with these dreams that were never going to amount to anything? I sat on my bed and let myself cry for the first time in years. Not quiet, polite tears, but deep, ugly sobs that came from somewhere I didn't even know existed inside me. All the years of comparison, all the times I'd felt less than, all the dreams I'd pushed down because I was too scared to fail, it all came pouring out at once. But here's what happened in that moment of complete breakdown. I started to get angry. Not just sad or hurt, but genuinely furious at how much of my life I'd wasted trying to live up to Sarah's standards, trying to gain my parents' approval, trying to be someone I wasn't. I grabbed my journal and started writing everything I'd ever wanted to do, but was too afraid to try, and the list was longer than I expected. Start my jewelry business, learn metalworking, create a website, sell at local markets, maybe even open my own store someday. These weren't stupid pipe dreams. These were real, tangible goals that I'd buried because I was terrified of proving Sarah right if I failed. As I sat there reading my own words back to myself, something clicked into place. The question wasn't whether I might fail. It was whether I was willing to spend the rest of my life wondering what if, just because Sarah told me I wasn't good enough. And in that moment, I knew the answer was no. Over the next few days, something fundamental shifted inside me, and I started to see Sarah's cruelty not as a death sentence, but as a challenge I was finally ready to accept. Every time doubt crept into my mind, I'd remember the look on her face when she called me a failure, and instead of crumbling, I'd feel this fire ignite in my belly. I made a decision that changed everything. I was going to use every ounce of pain, humiliation, and rejection I'd ever felt, and transform it into pure fuel for my success. I started waking up at 5 in the morning before my barista shift to work on jewelry designs, teaching myself new techniques through YouTube videos and online courses. My hands were covered in cuts from the wire and tools, but I didn't care. Every small injury felt like proof that I was actually doing something real instead of just dreaming. I saved every extra dollar I made from tips, cutting my expenses down to the absolute bare minimum, eating ramen and rice for weeks so I could afford proper materials and tools. My roommate thought I was crazy, working myself to exhaustion for what she called a hobby. But she didn't understand that this wasn't about the jewelry anymore. This was about proving to myself that Sarah was wrong, that I was capable of building something meaningful, that I wasn't the failure she'd declared me to be in front of our entire family. The beautiful thing about hitting rock bottom is that you have absolutely nothing left to lose, and that freedom is incredibly powerful. I stopped caring what my parents thought, stopped scrolling through Sarah's perfect social media posts, stopped comparing my behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. For the first time in my entire life, I was working towards something that was mine and mine alone, not trying to measure up to someone else's definition of success. Every time I wanted to quit, and trust me, there were many times, I'd think about that dinner table, about the silence that followed Sarah's words, about the look of satisfaction on her face, and then I'd go back to work, because failing while trying felt infinitely better than never trying at all. But what happened next, when I finally launched my business, was something I never could have prepared for. 6 months after that terrible dinner, I was standing in front of my laptop at 2 in the morning, my finger hovering over the button that would launch my online jewelry store. I'd spent every spare moment creating an inventory of 20 pieces, delicate silver necklaces with hand-stamped pendants, wire-wrapped gemstone rings, and minimalist earrings that I'd poured my heart into. My savings account was down to $800. I'd invested over $3,000 into materials and tools, and I was absolutely terrified that nobody would buy a single thing. The store was called Mia's Metalworks, and I'd spent weeks agonizing over every detail: the product photos I'd taken with my phone and a DIY light box, the descriptions I'd rewritten 100 times, the logo I'd designed myself after watching countless tutorials. Part of me wanted to just close the laptop and forget the whole thing, tell myself that Sarah was right, and save myself the humiliation of public failure. But then I thought about all those mornings I'd woken up before dawn, all the cuts on my hands from learning new techniques, all the times I'd chosen to work instead of going out with friends. I couldn't let that pain and sacrifice be for nothing, even if it meant risking everything I had left. So I clicked the button. I published the store, shared it on social media with hands that were literally shaking, and then I sat there in the dark, staring at the screen like it was going to explode. For the first 3 hours, nothing happened. No views, no likes, no sales, just crickets. I felt sick to my stomach, wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. But then, at 4:47 in the morning, I heard a notification sound that I'll never forget. Someone had purchased a necklace. A complete stranger had looked at something I'd created with my own hands and decided it was worth their money. I started crying right there at my desk, not from sadness this time, but from relief and hope, and the overwhelming realization that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't a failure after all. The first month of running my business was a constant battle between excitement and pure terror. Every time someone bought something, I felt this rush of validation, but every time a day passed without a sale, I'd spiral into panic thinking that it was all falling apart. I'd wake up in the middle of the night checking my phone for orders, calculating and recalculating my expenses versus my income, wondering how long I could keep this going before I'd have to admit defeat. Have you ever been so close to giving up on something you believed in? Drop a like and subscribe if you know that feeling, because what I'm about to share might help you push through your own doubts. The worst moments were when those internal voices sounded exactly like Sarah. I'd mess up a design or get a negative review, and immediately I'd hear her saying, "You're a failure," echoing in my head. There were at least 3 times in those first few months where I almost shut the whole thing down and went back to just working at the coffee shop full-time. The fear of failing publicly, of proving Sarah right after I'd been so determined to prove her wrong, was sometimes more terrifying than never trying in the first place. I'd sit at my workbench with tears streaming down my face, hands frozen, unable to create anything because the fear had paralyzed me completely. But here's what I learned about fear during those dark moments. It's just a feeling, not a fact. I started keeping a journal of every small win, every positive customer review, every time someone complimented my work or reordered from my store. When the fear got loud, I'd read through those pages and remind myself that evidence mattered more than emotion. I also started following other small business owners online and realized that everyone goes through these same doubts, these same moments of wanting to quit. The difference between people who succeed and people who don't isn't talent or luck. It's the willingness to keep going even when you're absolutely terrified. So I made a rule. I could be scared, I could doubt myself, I could cry and panic and question everything, but the one thing I couldn't do was quit. And that decision, that commitment to keep moving forward no matter how afraid I felt, changed everything. Because what happened next was beyond anything I could have imagined. 3 months into running my business, something happened that I never expected. A local boutique owner named Jennifer reached out to me through Instagram asking if I'd be interested in selling my jewelry in her store. I stared at the message for a solid 5 minutes thinking it was some kind of mistake or scam, but when I called her, she explained that a customer had come in wearing one of my necklaces and wanted to know where she could buy more of my work. Jennifer's boutique was in a trendy part of downtown, the kind of place where Sarah and her successful friends would shop, and she wanted to feature my pieces as part of her local artisan collection. We met for coffee, and I brought samples of my work with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, expecting her to change her mind once she saw my pieces up close. But instead, she picked up each item carefully, examined the craftsmanship, and told me that my work had something special, a rawness and authenticity that mass-produced jewelry didn't have. She placed an order for 30 pieces right there at the coffee shop, writing me a check for $1,500 as a deposit. I had to excuse myself to go to the bathroom because I started crying and didn't want her to see. That partnership with Jennifer's boutique became my first real proof that I wasn't crazy, that this wasn't just a pipe dream, that maybe I actually had something valuable to offer the world. Within 2 weeks, 12 of the 30 pieces had sold, and she was asking for more. Customers were taking photos of my jewelry and tagging both the boutique and my business on social media, which brought more traffic to my online store. My monthly revenue jumped from $800 to over $3,000, and for the first time since I'd started this journey, I could actually see a path forward. I wasn't rich, I wasn't wildly successful yet, but I was making progress, real tangible progress that nobody could deny. And that small taste of success made me hungry for more, but it also made me a target for criticism I wasn't prepared to handle. With success came an unexpected challenge. People started having opinions about my business, and not all of them were supportive. My parents, who had been quietly skeptical, started making comments about how I should get a real job with benefits and treat the jewelry thing as a nice side hobby. Friends from college would ask when I was going to settle down and pursue a stable career instead of playing around with crafts. Even strangers on social media would leave comments saying my prices were too high or that my designs weren't original enough. Have you ever felt like the more you succeed, the more people try to pull you back down? Drop a like and subscribe if you know what I'm talking about, because what I learned about handling criticism will blow your mind. But the hardest resistance came from inside my own head, from that voice that still sounded exactly like Sarah telling me I wasn't good enough. Every time I had a slow sales day, I'd panic and think, this is it, it's over, everyone's going to realize you're a fraud. When a customer would request a refund or leave a less than perfect review, I'd spiral into self-doubt, questioning every decision I'd made. I'd compare my small business to established jewelry brands with millions of followers and think, you're never going to get there. Why are you even trying? The internal resistance was worse than any external criticism because it lived in my mind 24/7, whispering doubts and fears that felt impossible to silence. I reached a breaking point about 6 months in when I was working 16-hour days trying to keep up with orders, and my roommate sat me down and told me I looked exhausted and miserable. She asked me if this was really worth it, if maybe everyone else was right and I should just go back to a normal job. I got so angry at her that I locked myself in my room for 3 days, barely eating or sleeping, just working and crying and working some more. But then something clicked. I realized that everyone's resistance, including my own, came from fear. They were afraid I'd fail and get hurt, and I was afraid I'd prove them right. But living in fear meant staying small, and I was done being small. I decided right then that I'd rather fail trying to build something meaningful than succeed at living a safe, small life that made everyone else comfortable. So I stopped listening to the doubts, stopped explaining myself to people who didn't get it, and doubled down on my vision. Because what was coming next would require every ounce of courage I could find. 1 year after launching my business, something happened that shattered my entire understanding of what was possible for me. I got invited to showcase my jewelry at a massive international craft fair that attracted thousands of visitors and hundreds of industry buyers. A prominent boutique curator named Marcus had seen my work online and personally invited me to exhibit, telling me he believed my designs had the potential to be sold in luxury shops across the country. I spent weeks preparing my booth, creating new pieces specifically for the event, and mentally preparing myself for either massive success or devastating failure. My hands were shaking so badly the morning of the fair that I could barely set up my display. I looked around at the other jewelry makers, people with years of experience, professional photographers, elaborate booths, and felt that familiar voice creeping in telling me I didn't belong there. But then I remembered sitting at my parents' dinner table listening to Sarah tell me I was a failure, and something shifted inside me. I wasn't here to compare myself to anyone else. I was here because I'd worked harder than anyone in that room to prove that I was capable, that I had something valuable to offer. By the end of that first day, I'd received orders from 7 different boutique owners, each wanting to carry my collection in their stores. But the real breakthrough came on day 2 when a representative from a major online luxury retailer called me over to my booth and asked if I'd be interested in being featured on their platform. They wanted to exclusive feature Mia's Metalworks as their Artisan of the Month, which would put my jewelry in front of hundreds of thousands of potential customers. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the moment when everything I'd sacrificed for. Every night I'd stayed up until 4 in the morning. Every time I'd chosen work over friends. Every tear I'd cried when doubting myself. It was all paying off in ways I'd never even imagined possible. The 6 months following that craft fair were absolutely surreal, and my life transformed in ways that went far beyond financial success, though the money was certainly life-changing. My monthly revenue jumped from $3,000 to over $25,000, which meant I could finally quit my barista job and work on my business full-time. But more importantly than the income was what had shifted inside me as a person. Have you ever experienced a transformation that went deeper than just external success? Drop a like and subscribe, because the real breakthrough wasn't about the money. It was about who I became in the process. I moved into a beautiful apartment that I could actually afford, filled it with art and plants and things that made me happy, and for the first time in my entire adult life, I didn't feel like I was drowning. My parents' attitude toward my business completely changed once they saw the financial success and the legitimacy of working with major retailers. They started bragging about my accomplishments to their friends, posting about my jewelry on social media, and asking detailed questions about my business strategy. It was validating to finally have their approval, but honestly, by that point, it didn't matter as much to me anymore because I'd already learned the most important lesson. I didn't need their validation to feel worthy. And then came the moment I'd been unconsciously working toward the entire time. The real revenge. The true victory that proved everything to myself and everyone who doubted me. Sarah reached out to me for the first time in over a year. And not because she wanted to reconnect or apologize, but because she wanted to know if I could create a custom piece for her wedding. She was getting married, and she wanted to wear something special, and she'd seen my jewelry being featured in major publications and realized that her little sister, the one she'd called a failure, had become someone worth taking seriously. I actually laughed out loud when I read her message, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because the irony was so perfect. The woman who'd tried to crush my dreams was now asking me to create something meaningful for the most important day of her life, and that's when I realized something profound about revenge and success. I want to be completely honest with you about what I did regarding Sarah's request for a custom wedding piece, because this moment taught me something that redefined my entire understanding of success and revenge. I created a beautiful necklace for her, genuinely beautiful, with the same care and passion I put into every piece I make. I didn't take revenge on Sarah by destroying her or refusing her. I took my power back by being better than the version of myself she'd tried to make me believe I was. I created something meaningful for her, not because I forgave all the years of cruelty, but because I had finally grown past the need to prove anything to her through negativity. What I learned through this entire journey is that true revenge isn't about hurting the person who hurt you. It's about becoming so successful, so confident, and so genuinely happy that their words no longer have any power over your life. Sarah's criticism had initially motivated me, but eventually it had to stop being my fuel because revenge based on anger is exhausting and never truly satisfying. The real victory wasn't when she called me asking for a favor. It wasn't when my business made more money than hers. And it wasn't when I could finally say, I told you so. The real victory was when I realized that I didn't care what Sarah thought anymore. Not because I was arrogant or cold, but because I'd learned that my worth had nothing to do with her opinions. I also learned that the people around me, my family, my friends, my doubters, they weren't actually the enemy. They were just people operating from their own fears and limitations, projecting those onto me. My parents weren't trying to crush my dreams. They were trying to protect me from disappointment because they lived in a world where big risks weren't rewarded. Sarah wasn't trying to destroy me. She was trying to maintain her position at the top of the family hierarchy because that's what she'd been conditioned to believe mattered. Understanding this didn't mean excusing their behavior, but it freed me from the burden of needing them to change or apologize for me to feel successful. My success became mine, not a rebellion against them, but a celebration of myself. As I sit here today looking back at the last 5 years, I want to leave you with this powerful truth. Nobody has more power to define you than you do. Not your family, not your critics, not the people who doubt you, and most importantly, not the voice inside your head that sounds like every person who ever told you weren't good enough. If you've ever felt like a failure, like you didn't belong, like you'd never amount to anything, I need you to know that this video is your permission slip to try anyway. So make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories like this. Sarah told me I'd never succeed, and she was technically right. Not because I failed, but because the person I became through this journey is someone who could never be defined by success or failure alone. I became someone who could take risks, handle rejection, learn from criticism, and keep moving forward anyway. That's what real success looks like, and it's available to every single one of you. Don't wait for permission from your family. Don't wait until you feel completely ready. Don't wait for someone to believe in you before you believe in yourself. The waiting is what kills dreams, not the trying. Take the risk that scares you, the one that makes your stomach flip and your hands shake, because that's where the real transformation happens. The people who matter will eventually come around, and the people who don't come around will fade into the background of your beautiful life anyway. What matters is that you show up for yourself, that you bet on yourself, that you decide that the pain of staying small is worse than the risk of reaching for something bigger. Your doubt, your fear, your past failures, they're not stop signs. They're just part of the journey that's going to make your eventual success even sweeter. I know my story might be different from yours, but the principle is the same. You have way more potential inside you than anyone, including yourself, probably realizes right now. The only real failure is never trying. It's playing small to make other people comfortable. It's abandoning your dreams because someone said you couldn't do it. So after hearing my story about how I turned my sister's cruelty into fuel for my transformation, what would you do in my place? Do you believe revenge brings peace? Or do you think true victory comes from building something better than the pain? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you're ready to take your own risk and build something meaningful, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story that might inspire you to finally go for it. I'll see you in the next video. After hearing my entire story about how I transformed my sister Sarah's cruel words into the fuel that launched a successful business, I want to ask you something really important that I hope you'll take time to think about and answer honestly in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in my position that night at the dinner table? Would you have let Sarah's words define you and destroy your dreams? Or would you have found a way to use that pain to push yourself forward into something greater? If my story moved you or inspired you to finally take that risk you've been putting off, please hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story that might be exactly what you need to hear right now. I genuinely believe that the people who watch this channel are people who are ready for a change, people who are tired of playing small, and people who are finally ready to bet on themselves the way I learned to bet on myself. I also want to leave you with one final reflection that I think is crucial for you to understand. Do you truly believe that revenge and getting even with people who hurt you brings real peace and happiness? Or do you think, like I do now, that the real victory comes from building something so beautiful and meaningful that their negativity becomes completely irrelevant to your life? This question matters because it changes how you approach your future and how you handle the people who doubt you. The most powerful revenge isn't destruction or cruelty or proving someone wrong in a way that hurts them. It's becoming so genuinely successful and happy that you don't even think about them anymore, that you've completely moved past needing their approval or their judgment. So here's what I'm asking from you right now. If you're ready to take the first step toward your own transformation, if you're ready to stop letting fear and doubt hold you back from building something meaningful, if you're ready to finally prove to yourself that you're capable of so much more than you currently believe, then I want you to subscribe to this channel and turn on those notifications. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be sharing more stories just like mine, stories of people who faced betrayal, family drama, and impossible odds, and who came out the other side not just successful, but genuinely transformed. I promise you that if you're going through something similar right now, these stories are going to be exactly what you need to keep pushing forward. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until you feel completely ready. Just take the first step today, and I'll see you in the next video where we dive into another incredible story of transformation and triumph.